I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd bring a divorce lawyer to her anniversary dinner. Then again, I never thought my husband would bring his mistress either. But there I was, standing in front of our bedroom mirror on the night of our 15th anniversary, staring at a woman I barely recognized anymore. The silk dress I'd bought 3 weeks ago, midnight blue with delicate silver threading that caught the light when I moved, hung perfectly on my frame. I'd lost 12 pounds in the last 6 months, not from some desperate attempt to recapture my husband's attention, but from the constant, gnawing anxiety of knowing something was terribly wrong in my marriage. The weight loss had hollowed my cheeks, sharpened my collarbones, and given my once soft features an edge that wasn't there before. At 43, I looked both younger and older somehow. My body more toned, but my eyes carrying a hardness that came from too many sleepless nights. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca, I whispered to my reflection, tonight you take back your life. The text message from Gregory had come in an hour earlier, exactly as I'd expected, running late at the office. Meet you at Le Bernardin at 8. Don't wait for me at home. The same excuse he'd been using for months. Only this time, I knew where. He really was. And who he was with. My personal assistant, Mara, had delivered the file to me 3 days ago. She'd placed it on my desk with a sympathetic smile that told me she already knew what was inside. The investigator sent this over. Said you'd want to review it before your meeting tomorrow. I'd hired the private investigator a month earlier, after finding a hotel receipt in my husband's jacket pocket from a weekend he was supposed to be at a medical conference in Boston. The conference had indeed taken place. I'd checked, but the hotel wasn't anywhere near the venue. It was on the opposite side of the city, in a quaint neighborhood known for its privacy and discretion. The photos in the file showed Gregory leaving that very hotel, his arm wrapped around a woman who couldn't have been older than 30. She had long, chestnut hair that fell in perfect waves down her back, a slim figure accentuated by an expensive-looking dress, and the kind of youthful radiance that comes from having the world at your feet. The investigator had identified her as Natalie Winters, a pharmaceutical sales representative who frequently called on my husband's medical practice. I hadn't cried when I saw the pictures. I didn't throw things or scream or call him immediately to confront him. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. 15 years of marriage, and this was how it would end. Not with the dramatic showdown most betrayed wives fantasize about, but with a calculated plan that would leave nothing to chance. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Harlow, the divorce attorney I'd consulted with yesterday. Reservation confirmed, for 9:15. Just text when you're ready for me to arrive. Perfect. Gregory and I were booked for 8 mows, which would give me plenty of time to confront him before Marcus showed up for the final act. I tucked the phone into my clutch, along with a USB drive containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered over the past month. Financial records showing money being funneled to a separate account, hotel receipts, flight itineraries for trips we never took together, the photos of him with Natalie. I slipped on my heels, 4-inch Louboutins that cost more than some people's rent, and took one last look at myself in the mirror. My dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist, my makeup flawless but understated. I looked like a woman in control, and for the first time in months I actually felt like one. The drive to Le Bernardin was quiet. My driver, Thomas, knew better than to engage me in small talk tonight. He'd worked for our family for over a decade, and had undoubtedly noticed the growing tension between Gregory and me. "We're here, Mrs. Blackwell," he said as the car slid to a stop in front of the restaurant. "Would you like me to wait?" "No, thank you, Thomas. I've arranged for another ride home tonight." I handed him an envelope containing $5,000. In cash, a bonus I'd decided he deserved for his years of loyalty. "Take the rest of the weekend off. I'll call you on Monday." His eyes widened slightly when he felt the weight of the envelope, but he simply nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell." "Rebecca," I corrected him. "I think we've known each other long enough for that." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen directed at me in weeks. "Rebecca, have a good evening." The maitre d' recognized me immediately as I entered the restaurant. "Mrs. Blackwell, how lovely to see you. Dr. Blackwell has not yet arrived, but your table is ready. Would you like to be seated or wait at the bar?" "I'll wait at the bar, thanks ya." "You?" I needed a drink anyway, something strong enough to steady my nerves but not so strong that it would dull my senses. I needed to be sharp tonight. I settled onto a plush bar stool and ordered a vodka martini, extra dry. As I sipped the cold, clear liquid, I replayed the plan in my head one more time. I would wait until after we'd ordered, then casually bring up the subject of his recent trips. No accusations, just innocent questions designed to make him squirm. Then, just as our main courses arrived, I'd show him the first photo. By dessert, Marcus would make his entrance, and the real show would begin. The restaurant was filling up quickly, the soft hum of conversation and the clink of silverware creating a soothing backdrop to my tumultuous thoughts. I was midway through my martini when I saw them enter. Gregory was wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd bought him for Christmas last year, the one he said was too formal for everyday use. His dark hair, now threaded with distinguished strands of silver at the temples, was perfectly styled, and he'd clearly just had a fresh shave. He looked handsome, powerful, every bit the successful surgeon he was. And beside him, her arm linked through his with casual intimacy, was Natalie Winters. The blood drained from my face as I watched them follow the maitre d' toward our table. Our anniversary table, laughing together about some private joke. Gregory hadn't even bothered to look around the restaurant, hadn't even considered that I might already be here, watching this betrayal unfold in real time. This wasn't part of the plan. He was supposed to come alone. We would have our confrontation, and then Marcus would arrive to drive the final nail into the coffin of our marriage. But this, bringing her to our anniversary dinner, this was a level of cruelty I hadn't anticipated. Downed the rest of my martini in one gulp and signaled for another. My hand was steady as I reached for my phone and texted Marcus. Change of plans. He brought her with him. Come now. His response was immediate. On my way. 15 minutes max. The bartender placed a fresh martini in front of me. From the gentleman at the end of the bar? He said with a nod toward a middle-aged man in a well-cut suit who raised his glass slightly in my direction. On any other night, I might have been flattered by the attention. Tonight, I simply nodded my thanks and turned back to watch the drama unfolding at my anniversary table. Gregory and Natalie were now seated, their heads bent close together as they examined the menu. His hand rested on hers atop the table, not even trying to be discreet. The maitre d' approached them, and I saw a momentary flash of panic cross Gregory's face as the man said something to him. Gregory looked around the restaurant frantically, and I knew he was looking for me. Our eyes met across the crowded room. His widened in shock, then narrowed as he said something to Natalie and stood up. He made his way toward the bar, his expression morphing from surprise to anger to a carefully constructed mask of casual concern. "Rebecca," he said as he reached me, his voice low and controlled. "I didn't expect you to be here already." "Clearly," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my martini. "Happy anniversary, by the way." He had the decency to flinch. "I can explain—" "Save it," I cut him off. "We both know there's only one explanation for why you brought your pharmaceutical rep to our anniversary dinner." My voice was calm, almost conversational. "How long has it been going on, Gregory? 6 months? A year?" He glanced back at the table where Natalie sat, now visibly uncomfortable as she realized who I was. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "On the contrary," I said, sliding off the bar stool and picking up my drink. "I think this is exactly the right place. After all, You chose it. Let's not keep your date waiting. Rebecca. I insist, I said, already moving past him toward the table. I felt him trailing behind me, helpless to stop what was coming next. Natalie's face drained of color as I approached. She was younger up close, probably not even 30, with the kind of flawless skin that comes from youth and expensive skincare, routines. I could see why Gregory was attracted to her. She was beautiful in an obvious way, with wide blue eyes and full lips that parted slightly in surprise as I took the empty seat across from her. You must be Natalie, I said, extending my hand. I'm Rebecca, Gregory's wife. She looked at my outstretched hand as if it might bite her, then reluctantly shook it. I didn't know that Gregory was married? I smiled sympathetically. Of course you did. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. Gregory slid into the chair between us, his face flushed with anger. Rebecca, that's enough. Oh, I'm just getting started, I said, reaching into my clutch for the USB drive. Would you like to see the photos the private investigator took of you two leaving the Hotel Marlowe in Boston? Or should we start with the financial records showing how you've been siphoning money into a separate account for the past year? Natalie's eyes darted to Gregory, who had gone completely still. You had me followed? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I had my suspicions confirmed, I corrected him. There's a difference. A waiter approached our table, oblivious to the tension. Are we ready to order, or do we need a few more minutes? We'll need, Gregory began, but I cut him off. I'll have the tuna tartare to start, followed by the poached lobster, I said, handing the menu to the waiter without looking at it. I'd memorized my order days ago. And please bring a bottle of the Pouligny Montrachet, the 2015 vintage. Excellent choice, madam, the waiter said, turning to Gregory and Natalie. And for you? Gregory ordered mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. Natalie mumbled something about the sea bass, her voice small and uncertain. As the waiter left, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I took another sip of my martini, relishing the moment. So, Natalie, tell me about yourself. How long have you been sleeping with my husband? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Look, I'm sorry. No, you're not, I said, my voice hardening slightly. You're just sorry you got caught. There's a difference there, too. Gregory leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. Rebecca, can we please discuss this privately? This is embarrassing for everyone. Embarrassing? I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Is that what you call it when your husband of 15 years brings his mistress to your anniversary dinner? Just embarrassing? I didn't know it was your anniversary, Natalie whispered, her face crimson. Of course you didn't, I said, suddenly, feeling a twinge of pity for her. She was young, probably thought she was in love. Gregory had always been charming when he wanted something. He probably told you he was planning to leave me, right? That it was just a matter of time? Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. How much does she know, Gregory? I asked, turning my attention back to my husband. Does she know about the prenup you signed? The one that says you get nothing if you cheat? Does she know about the malpractice suit that's about to be filed against you by the Hendersons? Or how about the fact that the house, the cars, the vacation property in Aspen, none of it is actually in your name? Gregory's face had gone from red to white. How do you know about the Hendersons? He asked, his voice barely audible. I know everything, I said simply. I've always known everything. I just chose to ignore it until now. The waiter returned with our wine, going through the ritual of presenting the bottle, pouring a taste for Gregory to approve, then filling our glasses. As he left, I saw Marcus enter the restaurant, exactly on schedule. He spoke briefly to the maitre d', who nodded and pointed in our direction. Who is that? Gregory asked, following my gaze. That, I said, raising my glass in a mocking toast, is Marcus Harlow, my divorce attorney. Gregory's eyes narrowed. You brought a lawyer to our anniversary dinner? Well, I countered, lifting my glass. You brought your mistress. I thought we were changing traditions. Natalie looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. I should go, she murmured, reaching for her purse. Oh no, I said, my voice pleasant but firm. Please stay. After all, you're a key part of tonight's festivities. Marcus reached our table, his imposing figure drawing stares from nearby diners. At 6'4", with broad shoulders and the confident bearing of a man who regularly faced down opponents in courtrooms, he made quite an impression. Rebecca. He greeted me with a warm smile, then turned a considerably cooler gaze to Gregory. Dr. Blackwell. Ms. Winters. He pulled up a chair from a nearby empty table and sat down, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. You know her name, Gregory said flatly, realization dawning. How long have you been planning this? Since the Hotel Marlowe, I replied honestly. Though I must admit, I didn't expect you to make it quite this easy for me. Our appetizers arrived. The elegant presentations at stark odds with the tension at our table. No one moved to eat. I've taken the liberty of having these papers drawn up, Marcus said, opening his briefcase and removing a thick document. It's a fair settlement, all things considered. You retain your medical practice and personal savings. Rebecca keeps the house's investment portfolios and receives a modest alimony for 5 years. Gregory stared at the papers, then at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. You can't be serious. Deadly serious, I replied. You broke our agreement, Gregory. 15 years ago, you promised to be faithful, to honor our marriage. In exchange, I supported your career, managed our household, entertained your colleagues, and turned a blind eye to your increasingly late nights at the office. I held up my end of the bargain. You didn't. This is insane, he sputtered. I'm not signing anything, Marcus smiled thinly. That's your prerogative, of course. But before you make that decision, I should inform you that Rebecca has documented evidence of your affair, your financial misconduct, and has witnessed testimony regarding certain indiscretions at medical conferences over the years. Gregory's face paled further. What witnesses? You'd be surprised how many of your colleagues' wives confide in me, I said quietly. Especially after a few too many glasses of champagne at charity events while their husbands are nowhere to be found. Natalie finally found her voice. I don't understand. What does any of this have to do with me? Nothing and everything, I told her. You're just the final straw, Natalie. The mistake he couldn't talk his way out of. I turned back to Gregory, whose arrogance had given way to naked fear as he began to understand the full extent of what was happening. You have 2 options. Sign these papers tonight and we'll handle this quickly and quietly. Or don't sign, and I'll ensure that every detail of your betrayal becomes public knowledge during what will inevitably be a very messy, very public divorce. You wouldn't, he challenged, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Try me, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I've spent 15 years building a reputation as the perfect surgeon's wife. I've attended every gala, donated to every charity, smiled at every boring dinner party. I've earned the right to burn it all down if I choose. Our main courses arrived, the lobster I'd ordered placed in front of me with a flourish. The rich aroma wafted up, reminding me that despite everything, I was actually hungry. I picked up my fork as if we were having the most normal dinner conversation in the world. The choice is yours, Gregory, I said, taking a bite of the perfectly cooked lobster. But I suggest you make it before dessert arrives. I've always had a flair for dramatic timing, and I'd hate to waste the opportunity. Gregory looked from me to Marcus to Natalie, who was now openly crying, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. The mighty surgeon, the man who held people's lives in his hands every day, looked utterly lost. This is our anniversary, he said finally, as if that fact might somehow change everything. Yes, I agreed, taking a sip of my wine. And I can't think of a better gift than freedom. As I savored my lobster and watched my husband's world collapse around him, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Tonight, Rebecca Blackwell was taking back her life, and she was just getting started. I watched Gregory's hand shake as he reached for his wine glass. 15 years of marriage had taught me his tells, the slight twitch at the corner of his left eye, the way he rubbed his thumb against his index finger, the forced, tight smile that never reached his eyes. He was panicking beneath that carefully constructed facade of confidence. "You've clearly thought this through," he said finally, his voice controlled but hollow. "Been planning it for some time." "I've had plenty of time to think while you've been busy with other activities," I replied, cutting another perfect piece of lobster. The truth was, I'd been meticulous in my planning, more thorough than he could possibly imagine. "Eat your dinner, Gregory. It's getting cold." Natalie hadn't touched her sea base. She sat frozen, her eyes darting between Gregory and me, clearly wondering how she'd ended up in this nightmare scenario. Part of me wanted to tell her she wasn't the first, that before her there had been Jessica, the surgical resident, Amanda, the hospital administrator, even Diane, the wife of Gregory's best friend. I'd known about all of them but had chosen to ignore the evidence, to pretend everything was fine. But Natalie had been different. With her, Gregory had gotten careless, reckless even. The credit card charges had become more frequent, the lies more elaborate, the nights away from home more numerous. He'd started talking about her, not by name, of course, but in veiled references to a promising new rep who really understood the challenges of modern medicine. "When did you know?" Gregory asked suddenly, pushing his plate away untouched. You were cheating? Or that you were cheating with Natalie specifically?" He flinched. "Both, I suppose." "I've suspected for years," I admitted, surprising even myself with the candor. "But I knew for certain about Natalie 3 months ago. The room service receipt from the Hotel Marlowe was for 2 lobster dinners and a bottle of champagne." "You're allergic to shellfish?" Natalie's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "You said it was for a colleague's retirement dinner," she whispered to Gregory. I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, is that what he told you? How creative. When I found the receipt, he told me it was a billing error." Marcus, who had been silently observing this exchange, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand. Dr. Blackwell, I urge you to review the settlement agreement. It's quite generous, considering the circumstances." Gregory ignored him, his eyes fixed on me. "So that's it? 15 years just over? Because of one mistake?" "One mistake?" I echoed, finally setting down my fork. "Gregory, you brought your mistress to our anniversary dinner. That's not a mistake. That's a statement, and I'm responding with one of my own." The waiter approached. Again, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the obvious tension at our table. "Would anyone care for dessert?" Before Gregory could speak, I smiled warmly at the young man. "Yes, we'll have the chocolate soufflé. 4 of them, please." "Excellent choice, madam. They'll take about 20 minutes to prepare." "Perfect," replied. "That should give us just enough time." As the waiter departed, Gregory leaned forward, his voice lowered to an urgent whisper. "Rebecca, be reasonable. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start." "A fresh start," I repeated, tasting the words like I might a sour wine. "That's an interesting way to frame it. Let me ask you something, Gregory. If I hadn't caught you, if I hadn't hired the investigator, found the receipts, seen the photos, how long would this have continued?" His silence was damning. "That's what I thought," I said. "You weren't planning to end it. You were just getting better at hiding it." "It's more complicated than that," he protested weakly. "Actually, it's remarkably simple," I countered. "You made vows. You broke them, repeatedly, and now you're facing the consequences. Natalie, who had been shrinking further into her chair with each exchange, suddenly pushed back from the table. I need some air, she murmured, grabbing her purse and heading toward the restrooms at the back of the restaurant. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of pity and vindication. She seems upset, I observed mildly. Gregory's face hardened. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Not as much as you might think, I admitted, but I am enjoying the thought of what comes next. And what exactly is that? I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Freedom. For both of us. Marcus took this as his cue, sliding the thick document across the table. As Rebecca mentioned, the terms are quite fair. You retain your practice, your personal investments, and your reputation remains intact. All we ask is your signature. Gregory stared at the papers, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. My reputation, you're threatening to expose. The affair if I don't sign. Not just the affair, I clarified. The financial improprieties, the questionable billing practices at your clinic, the malpractice concerns. Did you really think I didn't know about Dr. Mercer's concerns regarding your declining surgical skills? Or about the prescription pad? That went missing from your office last year? His face paled further. How? I've been your wife for 15 years, Gregory. I've hosted dinner parties for your colleagues, organized charity events with their wives, become friends with your office staff. People talk to me. They trust me. More importantly, they like me. It was true. While Gregory had been building his surgical empire, I'd been cultivating a network of my own. Not with any particular plan in mind, at least not initially. I'd simply been playing my part as the supportive spouse, the gracious hostess, the confidant who remembered birthdays and sent thoughtful gifts after hospital stays. I'd never imagined those connections would one day form the foundation of my escape plan. What exactly do you want? Gregory asked, his voice hollow. I told you. Freedom, a clean break, no dragged-out court battles, no public mudslinging. You sign these papers tonight, and we both walk away with our dignity relatively intact. And if I don't? Marcus answered before I could. Then Rebecca, we'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. The evidence will become part of the public record. The medical board will likely be notified of certain concerns. It could get messy. Gregory's eyes narrowed. You're blackmailing me. No, I corrected him gently. I'm offering you a choice. The sommelier approached to refill our wine glasses. I noticed mine was still nearly full. I'd been too focused on the conversation to drink much. Gregory, on the other hand, had drained his glass twice already. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the freshly filled glass to his lips. I built that practice from nothing, he said after the sommelier had departed. 15-hour days, 7 days a week, while you were at your charity luncheons and spa weekends. I felt a flicker of genuine anger for the first time that evening. Is that what you think I've been doing for 15 years? Spa weekends? You've hardly suffered, he said dismissively. The house in Westchester, the summer place in the Hamptons, the trips to Europe. You've had a pretty comfortable life, Rebecca. A life I helped build, I reminded him. Who managed our investments when you were too busy to look at the portfolios? Who entertained your potential partners and smoothed things over when you offended? The hospital board? Who redecorated your office when patients complained it looked cold and uninviting? He had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but pressed on. You didn't perform those surgeries. You didn't save those lives. No, I agreed, but I saved your career more than once. Remember Douglas Hendricks, the board member you insulted at the Christmas gala 3 years ago? Who spent 6 months rebuilding that relationship? It certainly wasn't you. Marcus cleared his throat again, clearly sensing the conversation was veering off track. The agreement stipulates that Rebecca will not interfere with your professional. relationships moving forward. Your reputation in the medical community should remain intact, provided you sign tonight. Gregory stared at the document, then back at me. What happened to us, Rebecca? We used to be a team. Teams don't work when one player is secretly playing for the other side, I said quietly. Natalie returned from the restroom, her face freshly washed, but her eyes still red-rimmed. She slid back into her chair without meeting anyone's gaze. I'm sorry, she whispered, though it wasn't clear who the apology was directed to. Don't be, I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my tone. You're not the first, and if history is any indication, you wouldn't have been the last. Her head snapped up, eyes locking with mine in shock, then shifting to Gregory with dawning comprehension. What does she mean, not the first? Gregory shot me a venomous look. Rebecca is being dramatic. Am I? I questioned, reaching into my clutch for my phone. I pulled up a carefully curated photo album, images I'd collected over the years but had never confronted him with. Jessica Lawson, 2016. Amanda Perez, 2018. Diane Colby, 2020. I slid the phone across the table to Natalie. You might recognize Diane's husband, James. He and Gregory play golf every Thursday. Natalie scrolled through the photos, her expression shifting from shock to disgust. You knew about all of these. I suspected, I corrected. I chose not to know for certain. Until now. She turned to Gregory, who was staring at his plate, unable to meet her eyes. You told me I was special, that you'd never felt this way before. I almost felt sorry for her. The script was so predictable, so banal. I'd probably heard the same lines myself, years ago, when Gregory was wooing me during my final year of business school. Back when I believed I'd found a partner who valued my intelligence, my ambition, my vision for our future together. You probably were special, Natalie, I said, surprising even myself with the sincerity in my voice. Gregory doesn't bother with women who aren't exceptional in some way. It's part of his pattern. The waiter returned, this time with 4 perfectly risen chocolate soufflés. Careful, they're very hot, he warned as he placed them on the table with a flourish. No one moved to touch them. I don't understand what's happening here, Natalie said finally, looking between Gregory and me. Are you two reconciling? Laughed, the sound genuine for the first time that evening. No, Natalie, quite the opposite. I'm giving Gregory a chance to end our marriage with a modicum of dignity, for both our sakes. Understanding dawned on her face. The divorce papers, she whispered. That's what those are. Gregory had finally reached for his soufflé, stabbing at it with uncharacteristic aggression. Rebecca thinks she's got it all figured out, that she can just hand me these papers and I'll sign away 15 years of marriage. 14 years. And 10 months, I corrected automatically. And yes, that's exactly what I think, because the alternative is so much worse for you. Marcus, sensing we were approaching a critical moment, leaned forward. Dr. Blackwell, I understand this is difficult, but I urge you to consider your options carefully. The agreement before you is fair, equitable, and most importantly, private. Gregory's spoon clattered against his plate. Private. That's what this is all about, isn't it, Rebecca? Maintaining your precious image. Heaven forbid anyone discover that perfect Rebecca Blackwell's husband has been unfaithful. This isn't about my image, I said evenly. It's about efficiency. I don't want to waste the next year of my life in court battles and depositions when we both know how this ends. Do we? He challenged, his tone almost mocking now. Because I'm not convinced this ends with me signing away half of everything I've built. 65%, actually, Marcus interjected. Per the terms of your prenuptial agreement. Gregory's face reddened. A prenup I only signed because you insisted it would protect both of us. He snapped at me. And it has, I replied calmly. It's protecting you from losing everything right now. Natalie, who had been watching this exchange with growing unease, finally spoke up. I think I think I should leave. Stay, I told her. You're as much a part of this evening as any of us. I don't want to be, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither do I admitted. But here we are. Gregory pushed his soufflé away, untouched. What happens if I sign? Tonight, I mean. What then? Then you're free, I said simply. Free to continue your relationship with Natalie, if that's what you both want. Free to focus on your practice without worrying about what I might know or who I might tell. Free from a marriage that clearly hasn't been working for either of us for some time. He studied my face, searching for the trap. And you? What do you get out of this arrangement? The same freedom, I replied. Plus the houses, the investment portfolios, and a reasonable alimony for 5 years. As Marcus said, it's all there in the agreement. My practice, he said cautiously. You mentioned concerns about my surgical skills. What exactly? Will remain between you, Dr. Mercer, and the hospital administration, I assured him. Unless, of course, you force my hand. The restaurant had begun to empty, the late dinner crowd thinning as the hour approached 11. Our waiter discreetly approached to see if we needed anything else, then retreated when met with 4 blank stares. Gregory reached for the document, flipping through the first few pages with a surgeon's precision. I watched his eyes scan the columns of text, noting when they widened slightly at certain provisions. This is comprehensive, he admitted reluctantly. I've had time to think about what matters to me, I said, and what I'm willing to let go. He continued reading, pausing, occasionally to ask Marcus for clarification on specific clauses. Natalie sat silently, picking at her untouched soufflé, clearly wishing she were anywhere but here. The Aspen property, Gregory said finally. You're taking that too? I spent more time there in the last 5 years than you did, I pointed out. Besides, you hate skiing. That's not the point, he protested. My name is on the deed. Your name is on a lot of things that my money paid for, I reminded him. The investment account that funded the down payment came from my family trust. He couldn't argue with that. My family's money, not substantial by New York standards but comfortable enough, had given us our start. The down payment on our first apartment, the seed capital for his private practice, the investment portfolio that had grown impressively under my careful management. What about the art collection? He asked, turning to another page of the agreement. You can have the pieces in your office, I conceded. The rest stay with the house. He nodded absently, continuing to read. The minutes stretched on, the silence at our table growing heavier as other diners paid their bills and departed. I noticed the staff beginning the subtle preparations for closing, folding extra napkins, quietly restocking silverware for the next day. Finally, Gregory looked up. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I tried to, I admitted. That's why I'm giving you this chance, Gregory. One clean break, and we can both move on. He looked at Natalie, then back at me. And if I don't sign, if I want to fight this? Marcus leaned forward. Then we proceed with a contested divorce. The evidence Rebecca has collected becomes part of the public record. The medical board receives an anonymous tip about certain concerns at your practice. The hospital administration reviews the complaints from your colleagues more seriously. Blackmail, Gregory muttered again. Consequences, I corrected. You made choices, Gregory. Choices that brought us to this table tonight. Now you have one more choice to make. I checked my watch, nearly midnight. Our anniversary was almost over. Somehow that felt appropriate. The restaurant will be closing soon, I said quietly. They'll want their table back. Gregory stared at the document for another long moment, then picked up the pen Marcus had placed beside it. I want my lawyer to review this before it's finalized, he said, a last attempt at maintaining some control. Of course, Marcus agreed smoothly. But we'll need your preliminary signature tonight. On these specific pages, he flipped to several flagged sections of the document. Your attorney can review the full agreement tomorrow, but these provisions lock in the core terms. Gregory hesitated, the pen hovering above the paper. He looked at me, really looked at me perhaps for the first time in years. I did love you, Rebecca. Once. I know, I said, and meant it. I loved you too. With a resigned sigh, he bent his head and signed each flagged page, his surgeon's hand steady despite everything. When he finished, he handed the pen to Marcus, who countersigned as witness. It's done then, Gregory said, pushing the document back across the table. Almost, I replied, reaching into my clutch one final time. I removed a small velvet box and placed it on the table between us. Happy anniversary, Gregory. He stared at the box, recognition dawning slowly. Is that your grandfather's watch? I confirmed. The one you thought you lost last year in Chicago. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the box, opening it to reveal the vintage Patek Philippe that had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. How did you left it in Amanda's apartment, I said quietly. Her husband found it and contacted me. He thought I should have it. Gregory's face drained of color as the full implications hit him. Not just that I knew about Amanda, but that her husband knew as well. That they had communicated behind his back. That there were more threads to this unraveling than he had realized. Why give it back now? He asked finally. Because despite everything, it belongs in your family, I said, rising from my chair. And as of tonight, I'm no longer part of that family. I nodded to Marcus, who gathered the signed documents and placed them carefully in his briefcase. Then I picked up my clutch, smoothed down my dress, and looked at Gregory one last time. Goodbye, Gregory, I said softly. I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away from the table. Away from 15 years of marriage. Away from the life I had built as Rebecca Blackwell. Marcus followed a few steps behind, a silent guardian of my new future. As we reached the restaurant's entrance, I heard Natalie's voice behind us, high and distressed. What watch? What husband? Gregory, what is she talking about? I didn't turn around. Their drama was no longer my concern. Outside, the night air felt crisp and clean against my skin. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. Where to now? Marcus asked, his professional demeanor softening slightly as we stood on the sidewalk. I looked up at the star-scattered sky, considering the question. For the first time in 15 years, I had no obligations, no appearances to maintain, no husband's career to support. My future stretched before me, undefined and full of possibility. Home, I said finally. I think I'd like to go home. But, even as the word left my lips, I knew that home would soon mean something entirely different. The house in Westchester, for all its grandeur, had never truly felt like mine. It had been a showcase, a setting for the perfect life I'd pretended to have. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of redefining home, of redefining myself. But tonight, as Marcus signaled for a taxi, I allowed myself one small, private smile of victory. I had walked into that restaurant as Gregory Blackwell's wife. I was walking out as simply Rebecca, unbound, unclaimed, and finally, undeniably free. The taxi ride to the Westchester house was quiet. Marcus had offered to accompany me the entire way, but I'd declined. He'd exit at his midtown apartment, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the remainder of the journey. You were magnificent in there, he said, breaking the silence as we crossed the Triborough Bridge. Most clients fall apart during confrontations like that. You never wavered. I did my crying months ago, I replied, watching the city lights shimmer on the dark water below. Tonight was just the final scene. Well, it was a command performance. He hesitated, then added, What you did with the watch, that was a masterstroke. Completely threw him off balance right when he thought it was over. I smiled faintly. I considered keeping it, you know. It's worth over $100,000, but some things have value beyond their price tag. Like closure? Marcus suggested. Like knowing you've taken away their last excuse, I corrected him. Now he can't tell himself I was vindictive or petty. I returned something precious that rightfully belonged to him, even when I didn't have to. That will bother him more than anything else. Marcus studied me with new appreciation. You're rather formidable, Rebecca. I learned from the best, I said. 15 years with Gregory taught me exactly how the power games work. We lapsed back into silence until the taxi pulled up outside Marcus's building on East 72nd Street. He gathered his briefcase and turned to me, his expression serious. The preliminary signatures are binding, but his lawyer will undoubtedly push back on some provisions. Be prepared for at least a few rounds of negotiation. I expected as much, I said. Just keep the core terms intact. The rest is negotiable. He nodded, then surprised me by taking my hand. For what it's worth, I think you're going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. I squeezed his hand before releasing it. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. As the taxi pulled away, continuing its journey northward toward Westchester County, I leaned back against the leather seat and closed my eyes. The adrenaline that had carried me through the evening was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to reach into my very core. But beneath the fatigue, something else was stirring. A flicker of excitement, of anticipation. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, my future was entirely my own. No husband's career to consider, no social obligations to fulfill, no appearances to maintain. The possibilities were dizzying. We crossed into Westchester just after 1 in the morning. The roads were nearly empty, the grand houses that lined our route dark except for the occasional security light. I directed the driver up the long, winding driveway to what was still technically my home, a 6-bedroom colonial on 3 manicured acres, complete with pool, tennis court, and separate guest house. I'd never particularly loved this house. Gregory had chosen it, insisting we needed something befitting his position when he'd made partner at his surgical practice. I'd preferred our previous home, a charming Tudor closer to the city. But as with so many things in our marriage, his preferences had ultimately prevailed. The security lights illuminated automatically as the taxi approached. I paid the driver, adding a generous tip for the late hour, and made my way up the stone path to the front door. The house was silent as I entered, the staff long since gone to their quarters or homes for the night. I slipped off my heels in the marble-floored foyer, the cool stone a relief against my aching feet. For a moment, I stood perfectly still, listening to the emptiness. This massive house had often felt hollow, but tonight the silence seemed especially profound. Or perhaps it was just that I was finally hearing it clearly. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Gregory. We need to talk. This isn't over. Predictable. Men like Gregory never accepted defeat gracefully. I didn't bother responding, instead heading toward the sweeping staircase that led to the 2nd floor. As I passed the study, however, I paused. This room had always been Gregory's domain. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, shelves lined with medical texts and biographies of great surgeons. I rarely entered it, respecting his need for a private space. But tonight, something drew me inside. I flipped on the light and looked around with fresh eyes. The room was immaculate, as always. Gregory couldn't tolerate disorder in any form. His desk was clear except for a silver-framed photo of us from at least a decade ago, standing on a beach in the Maldives, his arm around my waist. Both of us, smiling into the camera. I picked up the frame, studying the image. We looked happy. Maybe we had been, back then. Or maybe we'd just been better at pretending. Setting down the photo, I moved to the wall safe hidden behind a mediocre oil painting of a hunting scene. Gregory thought I didn't know the combination, but I'd watched him open it enough times over. The years. 6 left, 10 right, 22 left. The door swung open silently. Inside were the things Gregory valued most: his grandfather's military medals, the deed to his first medical practice, his father's college ring. And at the back, a small velvet pouch I'd never seen before. I hesitated only briefly before taking it out. Whatever moral compunctions I might have had about invading Gregory's privacy had evaporated the moment he'd walked into Le Bernardin with Natalie on his arm. The pouch contained a platinum ring with a sizable diamond, at least 3 carats, cushion cut, with smaller stones set in the band, an engagement ring, expensive, tasteful, and definitely not mine. I sat down heavily in Gregory's leather chair, the ring resting in my palm. So he had been planning to leave, not just conducting an affair, but preparing for a future with Natalie. The knowledge should have hurt more than it did. Instead, I felt an odd sense of vindication. My instincts had been right. The confrontation had been necessary. I returned the ring to its pouch and placed it back in the safe, exactly where I'd found it. Let Gregory deal with that particular loose end on his own time. Continuing my exploration of the study, I noticed a small leather journal on one of the bookshelves. Not a medical text, but something more personal. I recognized it as the journal I'd given Gregory for our 5th anniversary, encouraging him to record his thoughts about our life together. He'd thanked me politely at the time, but I'd never seen him actually use it. Curious, I opened it, expecting to find blank pages. Instead, the journal was filled with Gregory's precise handwriting, dating back several years. I sank back into the chair and began to read. September 15th, 2018. Dinner with the Fosters tonight. Rebecca charmed everyone, as usual. Sometimes, I wonder if she even realizes how effortlessly she wins people over. Watching her work a room is like watching a virtuoso perform. Every smile, every question, every gentle touch on someone's arm perfectly calculated for maximum effect. It's a gift, one I've benefited from enormously over the years. The Fosters Foundation will fund the new cardiovascular wing, largely thanks to Rebecca's efforts tonight. I should tell her how much I appreciate what she does. Somehow I never find the right moment. I turned the page, my heart beating faster. November 3rd, 2018. Started seeing Amanda privately. It's reckless, I know. But there's something about her, an energy, a passion, that I haven't felt in years. Rebecca and I have settled into such a comfortable routine. Too comfortable, perhaps. There's no spark anymore, no excitement. Amanda looks at me the way Rebecca used to, back when we first met. Like I'm the most fascinating man in the world. Is it so wrong to want that again? I flipped forward several months. February 14th, 2019, Valentine's Day. Rebecca planned an elaborate dinner at Daniel. Pulled strings to get the chef's table. She wore the diamond earrings I gave her for Christmas and looked beautiful, of course. She always looks beautiful. But I found myself thinking about Amanda throughout the meal. What does that say about me? Rebecca deserves better. Maybe we both do. Page after page revealed a man I thought I knew, but clearly didn't. A man torn between the comfort and status of his marriage and the excitement of his affairs. A man who recognized my value but couldn't bring himself to fully appreciate it. A man who knew he was causing pain but couldn't stop himself from inflicting it. The final entry was dated just a month ago, March 25th, 2023. Natalie says she wants a commitment, says she's tired of being the secret, the other woman. I understand. Her frustration. She deserves more than stolen weekends and clandestine meetings. But ending things with Rebecca is complicated. It's not just the financial entanglements, though those are substantial. It's everything else. Our history, our social circle, the life we've built. Rebecca has been a perfect partner in so many ways. The thought of hurting her makes me physically ill. But staying in a marriage that's become more business arrangement than love affair isn't fair to anyone. I need to find the courage to have an honest conversation. After our anniversary next month, perhaps. 15 years deserves at least that. Much respect. I closed the journal, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Gregory had been planning his exit strategy, just as I had been planning mine. The only difference was that I had acted first. My phone buzzed again, another text from Gregory. The ring is missing from the safe. Did you take it? So he'd gone straight home to check on his precious engagement ring. Of course he had. I texted back, the ring is exactly where you left it. See for yourself. His response came immediately. You were in my study? I didn't dignify that with a response. Instead, I returned the journal to its shelf and left the study, closing the door firmly behind me. Upstairs, I bypassed the master suite Gregory and I had shared and headed for the guest room at the end of the hall, the one I'd been secretly preparing for weeks. I'd moved most of my essential belongings here gradually, items Gregory was unlikely to notice. Favorite books, family photos, the cashmere throw my grandmother had knitted for me. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to make this room feel like mine. I slipped out of my dress, hanging it carefully in the closet. Tomorrow it would go to consignment, along with most of my surgeon's wife wardrobe. The diamonds Gregory had given me for our 10th anniversary, a necklace and matching earrings, worth well over $100,000, were already locked in the safe deposit box Marcus had helped me secure last month. In the adjoining bathroom, I removed my makeup methodically, watching my face emerge from beneath the carefully applied layers. Without the mascara, foundation, and lipstick, I looked younger somehow, more like the woman I'd been before becoming Mrs. Gregory Blackwell. As I slipped into the silk pajamas I'd laid out earlier, a recent indulgence from a boutique in the city, my phone buzzed yet again. Not Gregory this time, but a number I didn't recognize. This is Natalie. Can we meet tomorrow? There are things you should know. I stared at the message, considering my options. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with Natalie Winters or anything connected to my soon-to-be ex-husband. But another part, the part that had methodically gathered evidence for months, was curious. Four Seasons Lobby Bar, noon tomorrow, I replied eventually. 1 hour of my time, that's all. Thank you, came the immediate response. I'll be there. Sleep. Didn't come easily that night, despite my exhaustion. I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. By the time dawn broke, casting pale golden light through the gauzy curtains, I had made several decisions. First, I would not be staying in this house much longer. Despite having fought to keep it in the divorce settlement, I realize now it had never really been a home to me, just an elaborate stage set for the life Gregory had wanted us to project. Second, I would accept the invitation to join the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation that had been pursuing me for months. Gregory had discouraged it, suggesting it might conflict with his own hospital affiliations. That was no longer a concern. Third, I would call my younger sister in Boston, the one Gregory had always found too bohemian for his taste. We'd drifted apart over the years, my fault more than hers. It was time to rebuild that bridge, and finally, I would meet with Natalie. Not out of any lingering attachment to Gregory or his drama, but because information was power, and I had no intention of relinquishing any power in this situation. I showered and dressed with care, choosing a simple but elegant navy sheath dress and minimal jewelry. The person meeting Natalie today wasn't Gregory's immaculately groomed wife, but she wasn't a woman diminished by betrayal either. She was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, waiting for the chance to emerge. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when my phone rang. Gregory again. This time I answered. Yes? You had no right to go through my private things, he said without preamble, his voice taut with controlled anger. Like you had no right to bring your mistress to our anniversary dinner? I countered, calmly. We seem to be breaking all sorts of unspoken rules lately. He exhaled sharply. This isn't a game, Rebecca. No, I agreed. It isn't. It's a divorce. One you were planning yourself, if I read your journal correctly. Silence stretched between us. I could almost see him calculating, weighing his options. Gregory had always been strategic. It was what made him such a successful surgeon. Cut. Precisely. Minimize damage. Maximize results. We should talk in person, he said finally. This situation is complicated. Actually, it's remarkably straightforward, I replied. You signed the preliminary agreement last night. Your lawyer will review it today. We'll negotiate any necessary adjustments, and then we'll both move on with our lives. Nothing complicated about it. The ring, he said after another pause. It's not what you think. I laughed, the sound surprising even me with its genuine amusement. Gregory, I don't care what it is. I don't care who it's for. None of that matters anymore. Then why were you in my safe? The question caught me off guard. Why indeed? What? Had I been looking for? Validation? Confirmation? Or just one final piece of evidence to cement my resolve? Closure, I suppose, I said finally. And I found it, though not in the way I expected. What's that supposed to mean? It means goodbye, Gregory. Talk to your lawyer. Mine will be in touch. I ended the call before he could respond, setting my phone down beside my coffee cup. The brief conversation had left me feeling oddly energized, as if the last remaining ties to my old life had been severed. Gregory no longer had the power to hurt me, not because I didn't care, but because I had finally taken control of the narrative. My phone pinged with a calendar reminder. Noon. Meet Natalie at Four Seasons. I had 3 hours to prepare, though for what exactly I wasn't sure. What could Natalie Winters possibly have to tell me that would matter now? Curious despite myself, I opened my laptop and searched her name. The results were surprisingly substantial for someone so young. Natalie Winters, 29, graduated summa cum laude from Columbia with a degree in biochemistry. Currently employed by Barrett Pharmaceuticals as a senior sales representative. Previously published in several scientific journals during a brief research stint at Johns Hopkins. So not just a pretty face then. This was a woman with serious credentials and presumably a promising career. What had drawn her to a man nearly 20 years her senior, already entangled in a long-term marriage? The same question could have been asked of me, of course. I'd been 27 when I met Gregory, fresh out of business school and dazzled by his confidence, his drive, his clear vision for his future. He'd been 39, already established in his surgical career, recently divorced from his first wife. I'd ignored the red flags, convinced our connection was different, special. How naive I'd been. Was Natalie making the same mistake? Or did she know exactly what she was doing? Positioning herself to become the next Mrs. Gregory Blackwell, complete with the houses, the social status, the reflected glory of being a renowned surgeon's wife? The thought made me unexpectedly sad. Not jealous, not angry, just sad. For her, for myself, for the cycles we perpetuate without even realizing it. I closed the laptop and stood, suddenly restless. This house, with its perfect furnishings and echoing emptiness, felt suffocating. I needed air, space, movement. Grabbing my purse and keys, I headed for the garage where my Audi sat beside Gregory's conspicuously absent Porsche. He must have taken it directly from the restaurant to wherever he'd spent the night, his city apartment, perhaps, or a hotel. Not with Natalie, obviously, if she was meeting me at noon. I drove aimlessly for a while, following the winding roads of our affluent suburb without any particular destination in mind. The spring morning was crisp and clear. cherry blossoms and dogwoods in full bloom along the manicured streets. Everything looked peaceful, picture perfect, a facade not unlike the one I'd maintained in my marriage. Eventually, I found myself parking outside a small cafe in the neighboring town, a place Gregory would never have set foot in, with its mismatched furniture and distinctly bohemian vibe. The kind of place my sister would love. Inside, I ordered a lavender latte and a scone, then settled at a corner table near the window. The cafe was busy with the late-morning crowd, young mothers with strollers, freelancers with laptops, retirees lingering over coffee and newspapers. Normal people living normal lives, unmarked by the kind of dramatic confrontation I'd orchestrated the night before. I took out my phone and, on impulse, dialed my sister's number. It had been months since we'd spoken properly. Brief exchanges at holidays and birthdays didn't count, and I half expected the call to go to voicemail. But she answered on the third ring, her voice warm and slightly surprised. "Rebecca, is everything okay?" "Not really," I admitted, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "Gregory and I are getting divorced. Actually, it's more accurate to say I'm divorcing him. Last night I confronted him and his mistress at our anniversary dinner." Silence. For a moment, then an incredulous laugh. "Holy shit, Becca. Wow. Are you all right?" No one had called me Becca in years. The nickname brought an unexpected lump to my throat. I don't know what I am, to be honest, but I'm free. Or I will be soon." "Oh, honey," she said, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry." And also kind of impressed? That took serious guts. "I learned from the best," I said, thinking of our mother, who'd walked away from our father's emotional abuse when we were teenagers, rebuilding her life from scratch. Mom would have approved of the theatrics at least. "She would have staged a whole damn opera," my sister agreed, and we both laughed, the sound warming something long cold inside me. "Listen," I said impulsively, "I was thinking of coming to Boston for a few days, maybe next week. If you're free, we could—" "Yes," she interrupted. "Absolutely yes. Stay with me. My guest room is tiny, but the view of the Charles is amazing. We'll drink too much wine and catch up properly." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. We talked for another 20 minutes, making plans, sharing brief updates on our lives. By the time I hung up, it was nearly 11. If I wanted to make my meeting with Natalie, I needed to head into the city. As I drove toward Manhattan, the magnitude of what I'd done, what I was doing, finally hit me. I had dismantled my entire life in the space of a single evening. 15 years of marriage ended over dessert. My social circle, my daily routines, my very identity as Mrs. Gregory Blackwell, all of it now in flux. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, as I crossed the bridge into the city, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the bitter determination that had carried me through the confrontation at Le Bernardin, but a genuine, fragile hope for what might come next. Whatever Natalie Winters had to tell me, whatever negotiations still lay ahead with Gregory and his lawyers, one thing was certain. I was no longer merely playing a role in someone else's story. I was writing my own. And as I pulled up to the valet stand at the Four Seasons, exactly at noon, I found myself oddly curious to see what the next chapter would hold. The Four Seasons lobby bar exuded understated luxury, all muted earth tones, gleaming surfaces and strategic lighting designed to flatter its well-heeled clientele. I'd been here countless times before, hosting charity luncheons or meeting Gregory's colleagues' wives for afternoon cocktails. But today felt different. I was neither hostess nor companion, but something entirely my own. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a quiet corner table with a good view of the entrance. The maitre d' recognized me, offering a deferential nod as he escorted me to my seat. I wondered idly how long that recognition would last once news of my divorce became public. "Mrs. Blackwell, Lovely to see you again. The usual Belvedere martini? He asked. Just sparkling water for now, thank you, I replied. This conversation required clarity, not liquid courage. At precisely noon, Natalie Winters walked through the entrance. Without Gregory beside her, she seemed smaller somehow, less certain of her place in these rarefied surroundings. She wore a simple black pantsuit with a cream silk blouse, professional, modest, a stark contrast to the figure-hugging dress from the night before. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked like what she was, a young professional on her lunch break. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw her take a deep breath before walking toward me. Her posture was rigid, her expression a careful mask of composure. Thank you for meeting me, she said as she slid into the chair opposite mine. I wasn't sure you would. Curiosity is a powerful motivator, I replied, studying her face. Up close, without the dim restaurant lighting, she looked tired. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, a certain tightness around her mouth. You said there were things I should know. She nodded, then paused as a waiter appeared to take her order. Green tea, please, she said, her voice soft but clear. When the waiter departed, she folded her hands on the table, her fingers twisting nervously. I want to apologize first, she began. For last night, for everything. I never intended. Let's skip the apologies, I interrupted, keeping my tone neutral. You're not the first woman Gregory has charmed, and I doubt you'll be the last. What I'm interested in is why you wanted to meet today. She looked startled by my directness, but recovered quickly. Fair enough. I wanted to meet because there are aspects of my relationship with Gregory that you should be aware of, especially given the divorce proceedings. Such as? She took a deep breath. Such as the fact that I've been cooperating with the hospital ethics committee in their investigation of his surgical practices for the past 2 months. Whatever I had been expecting, it wasn't this. I kept my expression carefully neutral, but my mind was racing. Go on, I said evenly. I started seeing Gregory about 6 months ago, she continued, her voice steadier now. It began innocently enough, professional dinners to discuss new cardiac medications my company was developing. Then those dinners became more personal. He was attentive, charming. Said his marriage was essentially over, just a facade maintained for social convenience. The usual lines, I imagine. I nodded slightly. The waiter returned with her tea, and we both remained silent until he retreated again. 3 months in, I began noticing discrepancies, she continued, wrapping her fingers around the warm teacup. Prescription patterns that didn't match patient needs, procedures scheduled that seemed aggressive, given the diagnosis. At first, I thought I was misinterpreting the data. Pharmaceutical reps have access to prescribing information, but we're not doctors. But you have a background in biochemistry, I noted, recalling my earlier research. She looked mildly surprised. Yes, and enough medical knowledge to recognize red flags. When I started asking questions, Gregory became evasive, then defensive, then angry. Yet you continued the relationship, I observed, not bothering to mask the skepticism in my voice. I continued the relationship because I needed to understand what was happening, she corrected. By then, I'd seen enough to be genuinely concerned. About patient safety. I took my concerns to Dr. Eleanor Mercer. The chief of cardiology, I interrupted, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. The one Gregory claimed was jealous of his success. Yes. She asked me to continue gathering information. The evidence was concerning but not conclusive. We needed more. I sat back, studying her with new interest. So you weren't just Gregory's mistress. You were gathering evidence against him. She winced at the word mistress, but nodded. The ethics committee needed someone on the inside, someone he trusted, or thought he trusted. Why tell me this now? I asked. The divorce is already in motion. Gregory signed the preliminary papers last night because the committee is preparing to present their findings to the hospital board next week, she said. There will likely be consequences, professional sanctions at minimum, possible malpractice investigations, maybe worse. Given what I saw, last night I thought you deserved to know before it becomes public. I absorbed this information in silence, turning it over in my mind like a complex puzzle piece that suddenly made several elements of the picture clearer. Dr. Mercer's concerns about Gregory's surgical skills hadn't been professional jealousy, after all, but genuine alarm. The missing prescription pad hadn't been a simple administrative oversight. And most importantly, Gregory's increasing anxiety over the past few months hadn't just been about hiding his affair. He'd been watching his career unravel in slow motion. Does Gregory know that you've been investigating him? I asked finally. No. At least I don't think so. After last night. She trailed off, looking genuinely uncomfortable. I came to the restaurant to tell him it was over, that I couldn't continue our relationship. I had no idea it was your anniversary. I believed her, though it hardly mattered now. What exactly is the committee investigating, in layman's terms? She hesitated, clearly weighing how much to divulge. Inappropriate surgical interventions, unnecessary procedures, potential prescription fraud, and most seriously, possibly performing surgeries while impaired. Impaired, I repeated flatly. You mean drunk? On drugs? Both, potentially. There's evidence he's been self-medicating with benzodiazepines. And drinking, yes. I thought about the tremor in his hands I'd noticed occasionally over the past year. A tremor he'd dismissed as simple fatigue when I'd mentioned it. The mood swings, the increasingly erratic sleep patterns, I'd attributed it all to the stress of his practice, or more recently, to the strain of maintaining his affair. How bad is it? I asked quietly. Professionally speaking, bad enough that the board will likely suspend his privileges pending a full investigation, she replied with equal quietness. There will be a review of his recent cases, possibly going back several years. If the evidence supports the concerns, his career as he knows it could be over. I took a sip of my water, using the moment to process this bombshell. Gregory's surgical career wasn't just his profession, it was his identity, his purpose, the foundation upon which he'd built his entire sense of self. Without it, he would be lost. Why are you really telling me this, Natalie? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. Professional courtesy? Guilty conscience? Or is there something else at play here? She held my gaze unflinching. Partly conscience, yes, but also because I think you might be in a position to help. Help Gregory? I laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. After what he's done? Not Gregory, she clarified. His patients, past and present. Understanding dawned slowly. You think I have information, records, observations? She nodded. You've been his wife for 15 years. You've attended hospital functions, socialized with his colleagues, probably managed aspects of his schedule and correspondence. You might have noticed patterns or incidents that could help identify patients at risk, people who might need their cases reviewed urgently. I considered her words carefully. She wasn't wrong. Over the years, I'd absorbed countless details about Gregory's practice, names of patients he was particularly concerned about, surgeries that hadn't gone as smoothly as he'd hoped, colleagues he avoided after certain procedures. None of it had seemed significant at the time, but viewed through this new lens. I'm not sure I want to get involved, I said honestly. The divorce is messy enough without adding a medical ethics investigation to the mix. I understand, she said, surprising me with her equanimity. But I felt you should know what's coming. If nothing else, it might affect the financial aspects of your settlement. That was astute. If Gregory's career imploded, his income would plummet, potentially affecting alimony calculations and asset distributions. Marcus would need this information immediately. Thank you for the warning, I said, my tone neutral but not unkind. I'll discuss it with my attorney. She nodded, seeming relieved that I wasn't dismissing her outright. There's one more thing. You should know, she added, hesitating slightly. The ring you found in Gregory's safe, how do you know about that? I interrupted, suddenly alert. He called me this morning, frantic. Thought you'd taken it. I left it exactly where I found it, I said, an edge creeping into my voice. Though I admit I was curious about it. It's not what you think, she said, echoing Gregory's words from earlier. It wasn't for me. No? I arched an eyebrow, skeptical. He just happened to have a 3-carat diamond ring hidden away for… what? Investment purposes? It was for Dr. Mercer's daughter, she said quietly. Sophia. They've been seeing each other for almost a year. The revelation landed like a physical blow, momentarily robbing me of speech. Not because Gregory had been conducting multiple affairs simultaneously. That hardly surprised me anymore. But because of the specific identity of this other woman. Sophia Mercer, I repeated slowly. The surgical resident. The one who's been working on his service for the past year. Natalie nodded, looking genuinely uncomfortable now. I only found out recently myself. When I started working with Dr. Mercer on the ethics investigation, she mentioned that her daughter had broken off a relationship with an older married colleague. She didn't name Gregory specifically, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. And the ring? I pressed. He bought it about 2 months ago, according to what he told me last night. After Sophia ended things, he seemed to think he could win her back. I sat back, momentarily speechless. The picture that was emerging was almost too pathetic to contemplate. Gregory, desperately trying to juggle multiple affairs while his professional life disintegrated around him. Buying an engagement ring for a woman who'd already left him, while maintaining a relationship with the very person helping to investigate his medical practice. Why would you continue seeing him after learning about Sophia? I asked, genuinely curious. The investigation, she replied simply. Dr. Mercer asked me to maintain the relationship, to keep gathering information. It wasn't real. Not for me. Not for a long time. She paused, then added quietly, I'm not proud of the deception, but I believed the ends justified the means. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deceit, but found only earnest concern and what appeared to be genuine remorse. Either she was an exceptional actress, or she was telling the truth. So let me understand this clearly, I said, arranging the pieces of this increasingly complex puzzle. You began an affair with my husband, discovered potential medical misconduct, and then essentially became what? An informant for the ethics committee? All while maintaining the pretense of the relationship? Yes, she admitted. It sounds terrible when you put it that way. It sounds like something from a sensationalist cable drama, I countered. But oddly enough, I believe you. Relief flickered across her face. I didn't expect you to. Life has become rather unpredictable lately, I said dryly. I'm learning to adjust my expectations accordingly. She smiled faintly, then glanced at her watch. I should get back to the office. I've taken up enough of your time. Just one more question, I said as she began gathering her things. Were you ever actually going to marry him? If the ethics investigation hadn't come into play? She considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. I was flattered by the attention initially. But the more I learned about him, about his patterns, his history, the clearer it became that I would have just been the next in line, another replacement when the novelty wore off. She met my gaze directly. You deserve better than that. So do I. With that, she stood, smoothing down her immaculate pantsuit. Thank you for hearing me out. If you decide you want to share any information that might help the investigation, here's my card. She placed a sleek business card on the A table. My personal cell is on the back. I took the card, tucking it into my purse without comment. Goodbye, Natalie. Goodbye, Rebecca, she replied, then turned and walked away, her posture straight, her stride purposeful. I watched her until she disappeared through the lobby doors, then sat back in my chair, my mind reeling from everything I'd just learned. I signaled the waiter. I'll have that Belvedere martini now, I said. Some conversations required clarity, others required a stiff drink in the aftermath. As I waited for my cocktail, I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus. New information that may impact the settlement. Need to meet ASAP. His response came quickly. My office, 3 p.m. I'll be there, I confirmed, then scrolled to my recent calls and dialed my sister. Becca, everything okay? She answered, concern evident in her voice. Let's just say the plot continues to thicken, I replied. Are you still up for a visitor next week? I think I need to get out of New York sooner rather than later. My guest room is ready whenever you are, she assured me. Just say the word. Thank you, I said, feeling a wave of gratitude for this reconnection. I'll let you know my plans as soon as they're firm. The waiter arrived with my martini, perfectly made, with 3 olives, just as I preferred. I took a sip, letting the cold, bracing liquid steady me. Then I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Observations regarding Dr. Gregory Blackwell's medical practice, 2018 to 2023. I wasn't sure yet whether I would share this information with Natalie or the ethics committee. That decision could wait. For now, I simply needed to organize what I knew. The strange comments Gregory had made after certain surgeries, the names of patients who had experienced unexpected complications, the patterns in his schedule that had struck me as odd, but that I'd dismissed at the time. As I typed, a strange sense of liberation washed over me. This wasn't about vengeance or retribution. It was about truth, about consequences, about ensuring that Gregory's patients, past, present, and potential future, were protected from his increasingly dangerous behavior. By the time I finished my martini, I had compiled 3 pages of detailed observations and recollections. Dates, names, specific incidents that had seemed insignificant in isolation, but now formed a troubling pattern when viewed collectively. I saved the document, password protected it, and sent a copy to my secure email address. Then I gathered my things and headed out, instructing the doorman to hail me a taxi. As I slid into the back seat, I gave the driver Marcus's office address, then leaned back against the leather seat, watching the city blur past the window. In the space of less than 24 hours, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my husband, my future, had been completely upended. Yet instead of feeling adrift, I felt strangely anchored. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was making decisions based solely on my own assessment of what was right, what was necessary, what was true. If Gregory's career was imploding, that was a consequence of his own actions, not mine. If sharing what I knew could help protect innocent patients, that was a choice I could make without concern for how it might affect my soon-to-be ex-husband's reputation or earning potential. My phone buzzed with a text from Gregory. We need to talk. It's urgent, please. The desperation in those few words was palpable. He must have just learned about the ethics committee's pending presentation to the board, or perhaps Natalie had told him about our meeting. Either way, his world was collapsing around him, and he was reaching for the one person who had always been there to help him manage crises, smooth over problems, maintain the facade. But that person, that carefully constructed version of Rebecca Blackwell, no longer existed. In her place was someone new, someone still taking shape, someone who understood that some bridges needed to be burned in order to move forward. I typed a simple response. Contact my lawyer for all future communication. Then I blocked his number, slipped my phone back into my purse and turned my gaze forward, toward whatever came next. The taxi pulled up outside Marcus's office building, a sleek glass tower in Midtown. I paid the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk, feeling the spring, sunshine warm on my face. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing in the city air, allowing myself to fully inhabit this moment of transition. 15 years ago, I had walked down the aisle toward Gregory, believing I was stepping into a future filled with love, partnership, and mutual respect. Last night, I had walked away from that illusion, eyes finally opened to the reality of what our marriage had become. Now, I was walking towards something entirely new, a future I was designing for myself, step by deliberate step. There would be challenges ahead, complications I couldn't yet foresee, moments of doubt and perhaps even regret. But there would also be freedom, truth, authenticity. As I pushed through the revolving door into the building's gleaming lobby, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished marble walls. A woman in her early 40s, elegant in a navy sheath dress, her posture straight, her gaze direct and clear. A woman who had discovered her own strength not in spite of betrayal, but because of it. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Blackwell." The security guard greeted me as I approached the reception desk. "Mr. Harlow is expecting you." "Thank you," I replied, with a smile. Then, after a brief hesitation, I added, "And actually, it's Ms. Turner now, Rebecca Turner." My maiden name felt strange on my tongue after so many years, but also right somehow. A reclamation of the woman I had been before, becoming Mrs. Gregory Blackwell. The woman I was becoming once again, albeit wiser, stronger, more defined by my own choices than by anyone else's expectations. "Of course, Ms. Turner," the guard corrected himself smoothly. 15th floor, corner suite." I thanked him and headed toward the elevators, pressing the button for the 15th floor. As the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, I found myself looking forward not just to this meeting with Marcus, but to all the meetings, decisions, and experiences that lay ahead. The woman who had brought a divorce lawyer to her anniversary. Dinner was not the same woman who would emerge on the other side of this divorce. She was someone better, someone who understood her own worth, who refused to accept betrayal as her due, who recognized that ending a chapter was sometimes the only way to begin a new one. And as the elevator doors opened onto the 15th floor, I stepped forward into that new chapter, ready at last to write my own story. Marcus Harlow's corner office offered a spectacular view of the Manhattan skyline, but he wasn't looking at it. Instead, his attention was fixed entirely on the document I'd slid across his polished mahogany desk, my detailed notes regarding Gregory's medical practice. "This is extensive," he said finally, looking up at me with new respect in his eyes. "You documented all of this from memory?" "I've always had a good memory for details," I replied, "especially when they involve potential medical malpractice that could affect our divorce settlement." Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "If even half of this is substantiated, the impact on Dr. Blackwell's earning capacity will be substantial. We're no longer talking about a surgeon at the peak of his career with decades of future earnings to consider. We're talking about a surgeon who might lose his license," I finished for him, "or at minimum, face significant professional sanctions and malpractice lawsuits." "Exactly." He tapped the document thoughtfully. "This complicates our strategy." "How so?" "The preliminary agreement you negotiated was predicated on certain assumptions about Dr. Blackwell's financial situation, specifically his ability to maintain his current income level. If that changes dramatically—" He trailed off, then continued more decisively. "We may need to secure a larger percentage of the existing assets up front rather than counting on future alimony payments." I nodded. "That makes sense. The house in the Hamptons, for instance. I'm less concerned about keeping it than ensuring financial security." "A prudent approach," Marcus agreed. "Property values can fluctuate, and maintenance costs are substantial." Converting that asset to liquid investments might serve you better in the long run. We spent the next hour revising our strategy, with Marcus taking meticulous notes. By the time we finished, the settlement agreement had transformed significantly, placing greater emphasis on immediate division of existing assets and less on long-term support payments that might never materialize if Gregory's career imploded. "There's one more thing we should discuss," Marcus said as our meeting drew to a close. "This information about Dr. Blackwell's medical practice. Do you intend to share it with the hospital ethics committee?" I hesitated. "I'm still considering my options. From a purely strategic perspective, I should advise you that sharing such information before the divorce is finalized could complicate matters. Dr. Blackwell might argue you're attempting to damage his reputation and earning capacity out of vindictiveness." "And from a human perspective?" I asked, watching him carefully. Marcus set down his pen, meeting my gaze directly. "From a human perspective, if patients are at risk due to a surgeon's impairment, that transcends divorce strategy. But that's not a legal opinion, Rebecca." I appreciated his candor. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll let you know what I decide." As I gathered my things to leave, he added, "Oh, and congratulations on reclaiming your maiden name. Turner suits you." I smiled, surprised by how much the simple comment pleased me. It feels right, like I'm getting reacquainted with myself. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings. I checked my watch, just after 5. Too early for dinner, too late to accomplish much else. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Rebecca?" Dr. Eleanor Mercer's voice was warm with surprise. "This is unexpected. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," I said. "Nothing that can't wait. Are you still in the city? Would you like to meet for a drink?" "I'd like that very much," I admitted. "The usual place?" 20 minutes, she confirmed. We hung up, and I flagged down a taxi, directing the driver to a small wine bar in Murray Hill that Eleanor and I had frequented years ago, before Gregory's increasingly controlling behavior had subtly isolated me from friends who asked too many questions or noticed too much. Eleanor was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, a bottle of Barolo open and breathing beside, 2 elegant glasses. In her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a sleek bob, she exuded the confident composure of a woman who had navigated a male-dominated field for decades without compromising her principles. "You look different," she observed as I slid into the seat across from her. "In a good way. More present somehow." "I feel different," I acknowledged. "A lot has changed in the past 24 hours. She poured the wine, passing me a glass. "I gathered as much from your call. The last time we spoke was the cardiology fundraiser last fall," I supplied. "Gregory made sure I left early that night." "And now?" she prompted gently. "Now I'm getting divorced," I said simply. "Gregory brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner last night. I brought my divorce lawyer for dessert." Eleanor nearly choked on her wine. "Well," she said when she'd recovered, "that's certainly efficient." Despite everything, I found myself laughing, a genuine, unguarded sound that felt foreign in my throat. "That's one word for it." "I assume there's more to the story," she said, studying me over the rim of her glass. "Much more," I agreed, "including some things I think you already know about." Her expression shifted subtly, becoming more guarded. "Such as the ethics committee investigation into Gregory's surgical practices, his relationship with Sophia, his impairment issues." She set down her glass carefully. "How did you—" "I had coffee with Natalie Winters this afternoon," I explained. "She was quite forthcoming." Eleanor sighed, running a finger along the stem of her wine glass. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way. About Sophia, especially. I wanted to tell you when I first discovered it, but she asked you not to." I finished for her. I understand. She's your daughter. Her wishes came first. She ended it months ago, Eleanor said quietly, when she realized the full extent of his problems. The substance abuse, I said, not bothering to frame it as a question. Eleanor nodded. It started with anxiety medication, from what Sophia could piece together, benzodiazepines prescribed by a colleague, then alcohol to help with sleep, a dangerously common combination, especially in high-stress medical specialties. I thought about the prescription bottles I'd occasionally glimpsed in Gregory's bathroom cabinet, but had never examined closely. The increasing frequency of nightcaps that turned into 3 or 4 drinks. The mornings when he'd seemed foggy, unfocused, claiming exhaustion from a complex surgery the day before. How bad is it? I asked, echoing my earlier question to Natalie. Bad enough that we've documented at least 6 cases where patient outcomes were potentially compromised, Eleanor replied gravely. 3 required additional surgical interventions. 1 resulted in permanent disability. The clinical precision of her words couldn't mask their devastating import. Patients had been harmed, real people with families, lives, hopes for recovery that had been damaged by Gregory's impairment. The board presentation is scheduled for next Tuesday, she continued. Gregory will be summoned to respond to the findings on Wednesday. His privileges will almost certainly be suspended pending a full investigation. And Sophia? I asked. Will her involvement with Gregory become public during this process? Eleanor's expression softened with gratitude. No. We've been careful to maintain her anonymity. She's still a resident with a promising career ahead of her. The last thing she needs is to be tainted by association with a surgeon under investigation. Good, I said, and meant it. Whatever tangled relationships had formed and broken in this mess, Sophia was just starting her career. She deserved protection. There's something else you should know, Eleanor added after a moment. Something that came to light only recently, and that I suspect even Natalie isn't aware of. What is it? Financial irregularities, she said carefully. The committee's investigation uncovered evidence that Gregory may have been falsifying billing records, charging for procedures that weren't necessary, or in some cases, weren't performed at all. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Insurance fraud, I translated. That's not just an ethical violation, it's a criminal offense. Yes, Eleanor confirmed. The hospital is still determining how to proceed, whether to handle it internally or refer the matter to regulatory authorities. I took a long sip of wine, my mind racing. If Gregory faced criminal charges on top of professional sanctions, the financial fallout would be catastrophic. Legal fees, potential fines, civil litigation from affected patients, all of it would drain whatever assets remained after our divorce. Does Gregory know about this aspect of the investigation? I asked. Not yet, Eleanor replied. That portion of the findings won't be presented until the executive session of the board meeting. Only senior leadership has been briefed so far. I nodded slowly, processing this new information. Thank you for telling me. It doesn't change my decision to divorce him, but it does affect how I'll approach the settlement negotiations. I figured as much, she said. That's partly why I'm sharing it. You deserve to protect yourself, Rebecca. You've been collateral damage in Gregory's self-destruction for too long already. Her words resonated with a truth I was only beginning to fully acknowledge. For years, I had absorbed the secondary impacts of Gregory's choices. The strain of his mood swings, the loneliness of his absences, the silent humiliation of his affairs. I had adapted, accommodated, rationalized, but I hadn't protected myself. Until now. I have something for you as well, I said, reaching into my purse for the USB drive I'd prepared before leaving Marcus's office. My own observations regarding Gregory's practice over the past 5 years. Patterns I noticed but dismissed at the time. names of patients who mentioned unexpected complications or required additional surgeries. Dates when Gregory seemed particularly impaired but insisted on performing scheduled procedures anyway. Eleanor took the drive, her expression somber. This could be crucial evidence for the committee. Are you certain you want to provide it? I'm certain, I said firmly. This isn't about my divorce or any desire for revenge. It's about protecting patients who might be at risk. She nodded, slipping the drive into her jacket pocket. Thank you. The committee will treat this information with appropriate confidentiality. I trust your judgment, I said, and realized I meant it. Eleanor had always been straightforward with me, even when it might have been easier to look the other way or offer empty reassurances about Gregory's increasingly concerning behavior. We finished our wine in companionable silence, then ordered a second glass. Our conversation turned to lighter topics: Eleanor's recent trip to a medical conference in Copenhagen, my tentative plans to visit my sister in Boston. You know, Eleanor said as we neared the bottom of our glasses, I always thought you were wasted as a surgeon's wife. You have a remarkable analytical mind, Rebecca. The way you organize this information about Gregory's practice, the patterns you identified, the connections you drew, it's impressive. I have a head for numbers, I said with a self-deprecating shrug. It served me well in business school and later in managing our investment portfolio. Have you thought about what you'll do after the divorce? Professionally, I mean. I blinked, slightly taken aback by the question. Not really. It's all happened so quickly. Would you consider joining the hospital foundation board? We've been looking for someone with financial acumen who also understands the healthcare landscape. Your perspective would be invaluable. I'd need to think about it, I said cautiously. Given everything with Gregory, there might be a conflict of interest. Perhaps initially, she conceded, but after the dust settles, the foundation is separate from hospital operations, focusing on long-term capital improvements and community outreach. Your experience could make a real difference. I promised to consider it, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of professional purpose, of being valued for my skills rather than my social connections or appearance. We parted outside the wine bar with a warm embrace, the kind of genuine connection I'd been missing in the carefully choreographed social interactions that had dominated my life as Gregory's wife. Keep in touch, Eleanor said as we separated. Whatever happens with Gregory and the investigation, I'd like us to maintain our friendship. I'd like that too, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. As I headed toward the subway, a mode of transportation Gregory had deemed beneath us years ago, I felt a curious lightness, despite the weighty revelations of the day. Each piece of information, each decision, each small act of independence, was helping me shed the constrained identity I'd inhabited for 15 years. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. Rebecca Turner, I said, still savoring the sound of my reclaimed name. Ms. Turner, this is Detective Rosario with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Special Prosecutions Bureau. I'm hoping you might have a few minutes to speak with me regarding Gregory Blackwell. I stopped walking, my breath catching. What is this concerning, Detective? We've received information regarding potential insurance fraud at Metropolitan Surgical Associates, she replied. Your name came up as someone who might have relevant information. The official investigation had begun more quickly than I'd anticipated. I see, I said carefully. May I ask who provided my name? That's confidential at this stage, Detective Rosario said. But I can assure you, you're not a target of our investigation. We're simply gathering preliminary information. I considered my options. Refusing to cooperate would only delay the inevitable and might cast suspicion on my own involvement. But walking into an interview with a fraud investigator without preparation seemed equally unwise. I'm happy to assist your investigation, Detective, I said. but I'd like to consult with my attorney first and have them present for any formal statement. Of course, she agreed readily. That's completely reasonable. Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? Say 3 o'clock at our office on Hogan Place? I confirmed the appointment, then immediately called Marcus, who agreed to accompany me. A prudent precaution, he assured me. Given your financial involvement in Dr. Blackwell's practice, it's best to have representation, even if you're not. A target. By the time I reached my Westchester home that evening, my mind was whirling with the day's developments. The ethics investigation, the fraud allegations, the impending board presentation, all of it was unfolding with a momentum that seemed both overwhelming and oddly liberating. The carefully constructed facade of Gregory's life was crumbling, revealing the rot beneath. And I was free of it. Free to chart my own course, make my own decisions, define my own worth. I kicked off my shoes in the grand foyer, no longer concerned about maintaining the pristine appearance Gregory had insisted upon. Tomorrow I would begin packing for my trip to Boston, taking only what truly mattered to me. The rest, the designer clothes, the formal china, the pretentious art Gregory had acquired to impress his colleagues, could stay behind, artifacts of a life I no longer wanted. Upstairs, I paused outside the master bedroom, a space I hadn't entered since discovering Gregory's affair. On impulse, I turned the handle and pushed open the door. The room was exactly as it had been. King-sized bed precisely made with Egyptian cotton sheets, cashmere throw arranged just so across the foot, bedside tables with matching lamps illuminating. Carefully curated art books that Gregory had never actually read. A room designed for appearance rather than comfort, for impressing rather than living. I walked to the closet, my closet, and ran my fingers along the rows of designer dresses, tailored suits and evening gowns that had been my uniform as Mrs. Gregory Blackwell, chief of cardiothoracic surgery's wife. Each garment represented an event, a performance, a carefully maintained image. I had worn them all like costumes, playing my assigned role. At the very back, nearly hidden behind winter coats, hung a simple blue dress I'd bought for myself years ago, a rare purchase made without consideration for Gregory's preferences or how it would look to his colleagues. I'd worn it exactly once, to lunch with my sister during her last visit to New York. Gregory had frowned when he saw it, calling it pedestrian, and suggesting I change before we met friends for dinner. I pulled it out now, holding it against me. The fabric was soft with age, the style understated but flattering. It represented a different Rebecca, a woman who chose clothes for herself rather than to fulfill others' expectations. I would take this dress to Boston, I decided. Along with my grandmother's quilt, the first edition novels I'd collected in secret, and the small watercolor painting I'd bought from a street artist in Paris while Gregory was attending a medical conference. The rest could go to consignment, or charity. A fresh start demanded shedding more than just a married name. My phone rang again, Marcus calling back with additional thoughts about tomorrow's interview. We spoke for 20 minutes, mapping out a careful strategy. I would be forthcoming about my knowledge of Gregory's practice, but clear about my limited involvement in its financial operations. I would provide factual information without speculation or accusation. I would present myself as a cooperating witness rather than a vengeful ex-wife. The timing of all this, the ethics investigation, the fraud inquiry, your divorce, it's going to raise questions, Marcus warned. People may assume you initiated these investigations out of spite. Let them assume what they want, I replied, surprising myself with my indifference. The truth is in the evidence. Gregory's actions are catching up with him, not because of anything I've done, but because of everything he's done. After hanging up, I moved through the house gathering items. For my Boston trip, comfortable clothes, personal mementos, the documents Marcus had advised me to keep close. As I packed, I felt a curious sense of liberation, as if each item I chose to take or leave behind was a decision about who I wanted to be going forward. The doorbell rang just as I was zipping my suitcase. Glancing at my watch, I frowned. It was nearly 10 o'clock, too late for casual visitors. I made my way downstairs cautiously, peering through the peephole before opening the door. Sophia Mercer stood on my doorstep, her expression a complex mix of determination and apprehension. In her late 20s, with her mother's dark hair and striking features, she looked exhausted but resolute. "I'm sorry to come by so late," she said quickly, "but I need to talk to you. About Gregory. About everything." I hesitated only briefly, before stepping aside to let her in. "I think I could use a cup of tea," I said. "Would you like one?" She nodded gratefully, following me to the kitchen, a space Gregory rarely entered, and consequently the one room in the house that felt genuinely mine. As I filled the kettle and set out mugs, Sophia perched on a stool at the island, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the marble countertop. "My mother told me you met with her tonight," she began, "that you provided information for the ethics investigation." "I did," I confirmed, selecting chamomile tea bags from a wooden box. "It seemed like the right thing to do." "It was," she said firmly. "That's partly why I'm here, to thank you, and to apologize." I turned to face her fully. "You have nothing to apologize for, Sophia. I was involved with your husband," she said bluntly. "While he was married to you, that deserves an apology." I leaned against the counter, studying her. "Did you know he was married when it began?" "Yes," she admitted. "He said it was in name only. That you had an understanding." She laughed bitterly. "The oldest line in the book, and I fell for it." "So did I once," I said gently. "Gregory has always been persuasive when he wants something." The kettle whistled, and I busied myself preparing our tea. When I slid a steaming mug toward Sophia, she wrapped her hands around it as if seeking warmth beyond the physical. "There's something else you should know," she said after taking a sip. "Something I discovered just before I ended things with Gregory. Something that could affect your divorce settlement." I sat on the stool beside her, my own tea momentarily forgotten. "What is it?" "Hidden assets," she said simply. "A bank account in the Cayman Islands. I saw the statements on his laptop one night when he was in surgery. Over $2 million that I'm certain isn't included in any of his disclosed financial records. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given everything else I'd learned about Gregory's deceptions, but somehow it still did. Perhaps because financial dishonesty seemed so calculated, so premeditated, compared to the impulsivity of his affairs or the gradual slide into substance abuse. "Do you have any proof?" I asked, my mind already calculating how this would affect our settlement negotiations. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive similar to the one I'd given Eleanor earlier. "Copies of everything I found. Account numbers, transaction, records, even the offshore shell company he established to hide the transfers. It's all here." I took the drive, setting it carefully beside my tea mug. "Why are you giving me this?" She met my gaze directly. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because Gregory used both of us, and you deserve to know the truth. And because—" she hesitated, then continued more softly. "Because when I found out about his impairment issues, his fraudulent billing practices, I reported it to the ethics committee. That investigation is going to destroy his career, possibly lead to criminal charges. This," she nodded toward the flash drive, "this is me making sure you're not collateral damage in the fallout." I studied her face, seeing not the other woman who had shared my husband's bed, but a young doctor with a strong moral compass who had found herself entangled with a manipulative man and chosen to do the right thing, regardless of personal cost. "Thank you," I said simply. "This can't have been easy for you." "None of it has been easy," she acknowledged. "But necessary things rarely are." We finished our tea in a strangely companionable silence, two women united not by resentment or competition, but by the shared experience of Gregory's betrayal and our mutual determination to move forward with integrity. When Sophia rose to leave, I walked her to the door, feeling an unexpected connection to this young woman who had, under different circumstances, might have become my friend rather than my husband's mistress. "What will you do now?" she asked as she stood on the threshold. "After the divorce, I mean." I smiled, surprising myself with the genuine warmth of the expression. "I'm going to Boston tomorrow to visit my sister. After that, I'm not entirely sure, but for the first time in 15 years, the decision is entirely mine, and that feels remarkable." Sophia nodded, understanding, lighting her tired features. Freedom often does. As I closed the door behind her, I realized she was right. What I was feeling, this mixture of uncertainty and exhilaration, trepidation and hope, was the sensation of true freedom. The freedom to make mistakes, to change course, to discover who Rebecca Turner was beyond the carefully constructed identity of Mrs. Gregory Blackwell. And as I returned to my packing, adding the flash drive Sophia had provided to my growing collection of evidence, I found myself looking forward not just to the justice that would soon catch up with Gregory, but to the journey of rediscovery that lay ahead for me. The divorce lawyer I'd brought to our anniversary dinner had been just the first step. Now, with each revelation, each decision, each small act of reclamation, I was writing the opening chapters of a new story, one in which I was finally, unequivocally, the author of my own life. Morning light filtered through the guest room curtains, waking me gently. For a moment, I lay still, orienting myself. This room, not the master suite I'd shared with Gregory for 15 years, had become my sanctuary over the past 2 days. A transitional space between the life I was leaving and the one I had yet to fully claim. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Marcus DA interview at 3 p.m. confirmed. Meeting in my office at 1:30 to prep. Bring the offshore account evidence. I sent a quick acknowledgement, then checked my other messages. My sister had texted flight options for Boston. Eleanor had sent a brief note confirming receipt of my USB drive and its distribution to the Ethics Committee. And unexpectedly, there was a message from Thomas, our longtime driver, Mrs. Blackwell. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but Dr. Blackwell came to my apartment last night. Quite intoxicated. He offered me $5,000 to tell him where you were going. I declined. Thought you should know." I stared at the message, a chill running through me despite the warm spring morning. Gregory had never shown this level of desperation before. The carefully controlled surgeon who prided himself on maintaining appearances at all costs was unraveling rapidly. "Thank you, Tomas. You did the right thing. And please, call me Rebecca." I added another $5,000 to the electronic transfer I was already planning to send him. Loyalty deserved recognition. By 9 o'clock, I was showered, dressed, and seated at the kitchen island with my laptop, reviewing the contents of Sophia's flash drive. The evidence was even more damning than she had suggested. Not just a count. Statements, but emails between Gregory and an offshore financial advisor discussing the best methods to conceal assets from potential future claims. Some of the emails dated back nearly 3 years, suggesting Gregory had been planning his exit strategy, or at least protecting himself against one, long before his affair with Natalie or Sophia, perhaps even before the other affairs I'd discovered. The premeditation was chilling, revealing a calculated dishonesty I hadn't fully grasped even after uncovering his infidelities. I forwarded the most relevant documents to Marcus with a brief note explaining their source, then closed my laptop and surveyed the kitchen. This bright, airy space had been my domain in a house that had otherwise felt like a showcase more than a home. I'd selected the warm copper cookware that hung from the ceiling rack, chosen the butcher block island instead of the marble Gregory, had insisted on the cozy breakfast nook with its cushioned window seat. I would miss this kitchen. Not enough to stay, certainly, but enough to acknowledge that even in a marriage that had ultimately failed, there had been spaces where I'd exercised my own agency, made choices that reflected my preferences rather than Gregory's. My phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Boston area code. "Rebecca Turner," I answered. "Ms. Turner, this is Andrew Callahan from Northeastern University's Business School. Dr. Eleanor Mercer suggested I give you a call. Do you have a moment?" Surprised but curious, I agreed. Andrew, it transpired, was the chair of the finance department and an old friend of Eleanor's. They had been discussing the hospital foundation's investment strategies over dinner, and my name had come up. "Eleanor mentioned you have a finance background and might be looking for new opportunities," he explained. "We're developing an executive education program focused on healthcare finance, and we need someone who understands both the investment side and the medical landscape. Would you be interested in discussing a potential consulting role?" The offer caught me completely off guard. I'm in the middle of a rather complicated divorce," I said cautiously, "and I haven't worked professionally in the field for some time." "Eleanor mentioned that as well," Andrew replied, his tone warm and understanding. "This role would be flexible, initially part-time consulting, with potential to develop into something more structured if it's a good fit. No pressure to commit immediately. Perhaps we could just have a conversation when you're in Boston next week?" I found myself agreeing to coffee on Wednesday, surprised by how quickly new possibilities were emerging. We exchanged contact information, and I promised to send him my resume, which would need significant updating after 15 years as a surgeon's wife rather than a financial professional. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing this unexpected development. Eleanor had not only offered me a position on the hospital foundation board, but had recommended me for a professional opportunity that aligned perfectly with my background and skills. She saw value in me, not as Gregory's wife or a social connection, but as a capable professional in my own right. The realization brought tears to my eyes. For years, I'd sublimated my own ambitions to support Gregory's career, gradually accepting his narrative that my business acumen was useful primarily for managing our household finances and investment portfolio. I'd allowed my professional identity to fade, becoming the accomplished hostess and surgeon's wife rather than the Baker Scholar MBA, who had once fielded multiple job offers from top financial firms. Perhaps it wasn't too late to reclaim that part of myself, to use my skills not just to manage a household or support someone else's career, but to make a meaningful contribution in my own right. With renewed purpose, I opened my laptop again and began updating my resume, documenting not just my formal education and early career experiences, but also the relevant skills I'd developed during my years managing the complex finances of our household, optimizing our investment portfolio, and serving on various charitable boards and committees. By noon, I had a polished 2-page document that presented a professional narrative more coherent than I'd expected. Yes, there was a significant gap in traditional employment, but I'd remained engaged in financial management throughout my marriage, just in a private rather than corporate context. I emailed the resume to Andrew, then packed my laptop and the flash drive into my bag. It was time to meet Marcus and prepare for the district attorney's interview. The city seemed different today, more vibrant, more accessible. Or perhaps I was simply seeing it through new eyes, no longer constrained by Gregory's preferences and prejudices. I took the subway to Marcus's office, something the old Rebecca would never have done, and found myself enjoying the democratic jostle of the crowded car, the glimpses of diverse lives intersecting briefly before continuing on their separate paths. Marcus was waiting in his office, his manner more formal than during our previous meetings. "This interview is significant, Rebecca. Criminal investigations have different stakes than civil proceedings. You'll need to be precise, careful." "I understand," I assured him. "I've reviewed the offshore account documents and organized my knowledge of Gregory's practice in chronological order as you suggested." He nodded approvingly. "Good. Let's talk strategy. For the next hour, Marcus walked me through potential questions, helping me frame my responses to be factual without speculation or apparent bias. The DA's office will be assessing not just the information you provide, but your credibility as a witness, he explained. They'll be watching for any hint of vindictiveness or exaggeration. I don't need to exaggerate, I replied. The truth is damning enough. At precisely 2:45, we left Marcus's office and walked the short distance to the district attorney's building on Hogan Place. The interview room was small, but not intimidating. AIG conference table, comfortable chairs, a window overlooking a nondescript courtyard. Detective Rosario was waiting for us, along with an assistant district attorney named Judith Chen. After introductions and preliminary formalities, Detective Rosario began the questioning. Ms. Turner, can you describe your involvement in Dr. Blackwell's medical practice? I had no formal role in the practice, I clarified. I occasionally attended social functions with hospital staff and board members, but I wasn't involved in day-to-day operations or financial management. Yet you had access to certain information about the practice's billing patterns, Ada Chen interjected. Not direct access, I explained. But over 15 years of marriage to a surgeon, you absorb certain details. Gregory, Dr. Blackwell, would discuss challenging cases, scheduling conflicts, billing issues. Not in a systematic way, but in the context of everyday conversations about his work. And when did you first notice potential irregularities in these patterns? Detective Rosario asked. I considered carefully. About 2 years ago, I began noticing discrepancies between the procedures Gregory described performing and the billing statements that occasionally came to our home address. I didn't immediately recognize them as irregularities, just inconsistencies that seemed odd. Can you give us a specific example? Ada Chen pressed. In March of last year, Gregory mentioned a particularly difficult valve replacement that had taken longer than expected because the patient had unexpected complications. But when the insurance statement came to our house, mistakenly, as most went directly to the practice's billing department, it showed charges for a coronary bypass, as well as the valve replacement. I knew from our conversation that no bypass had been performed. Did you question Dr. Blackwell about this discrepancy? I did, I confirmed. He dismissed it as a coding error by the billing staff and said he'd have it corrected. I didn't pursue it further at the time. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, with Detective Rosario and Ada Chen asking increasingly detailed questions about specific procedures, billing patterns, and Gregory's behavior during the periods in question. I answered as precisely as possible, neither minimizing nor exaggerating what I had observed. Finally, Ada Chen leaned forward, her expression intensely focused. Ms. Turner, we understand you're in the process of divorcing Dr. Blackwell. We need to be clear about your motivations for coming forward with this information. Marcus shifted slightly beside me, a subtle reminder to tread carefully. I met Ada Chen's gaze directly. I didn't initiate this investigation, Ms. Chen. You contacted me. But now that you have, I'm cooperating fully because patients may have been harmed by my husband's actions. My divorce is a separate matter. Yet the timing is convenient, she pressed. Financial improprieties discovered just as you're negotiating a settlement. On the contrary, I countered calmly. The timing is highly inconvenient for me. If Gregory faces criminal charges and loses his medical license, the financial settlement in our divorce will be significantly reduced. From a purely self-interested perspective, I'd have been better off staying silent until our divorce was finalized. Detective Rosario exchanged a glance with Ada Chen. You've provided valuable context, Ms. Turner, but what we really need is documentary evidence of these billing irregularities. This was the moment Marcus and I had prepared for. I believe I can help with that, I said, reaching into my bag. For Sophia's flash drive. This contains evidence not only of billing fraud, but also of hidden assets that Dr. Blackwell has concealed from both tax authorities and divorce proceedings. Ada Chen accepted the drive, her expression carefully neutral. May I ask how you obtained this evidence? It was provided to me by a third party who had legitimate access to Dr. Blackwell's financial records, I replied, following the phrasing Marcus and I had agreed upon. We had decided not to volunteer Sophia's identity unless directly asked, to protect her from potential professional repercussions. And this third party would be willing to testify if necessary? Detective Rosario asked. I believe so. Yes, I confirmed. Though I'd prefer not to disclose their identity at this stage without their explicit consent. Ada Chen nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. We'll review this evidence and likely have additional questions. Are you planning to remain in the New York area for the foreseeable future? I'll be in Boston next week visiting family, I replied. But after that, yes, I'll be available as needed. With that, the formal interview concluded. As Marcus and I gathered our things to leave, Detective Rosario held back slightly, addressing me while Ada Chen was occupied with paperwork. Off the record, Ms. Turner, this kind of fraud investigation often gets messy. Dr. Blackwell will likely learn that you've provided evidence against him. Are you prepared for that? I appreciated her concern. Detective, 2 days ago, my husband brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner. I brought my divorce lawyer for dessert. I think I can handle a little messiness. A brief smile flickered across her usually stoic face. Fair enough. We'll be in touch. Outside the DA's office, Marcus expressed satisfaction with how the interview had gone. You were composed, precise, and credible, exactly what they needed. The offshore account, evidence is particularly compelling. If it checks out, Dr. Blackwell could be facing serious charges beyond the medical ethics violations. What happens next? I asked as we walked toward the subway station. The DA's office will investigate further, likely subpoena official records from the hospital and insurance companies, possibly interview other witnesses. These investigations take time, months, sometimes years. But in the meantime, we can use the existence of the investigation to strengthen our position in the divorce settlement. I nodded, understanding the strategy. Gregory will fight harder once he realizes what's at stake. Undoubtedly, Marcus agreed. But he'll be fighting on multiple fronts: the ethics committee, potentially the DA's office, and our divorce proceedings. That works to our advantage. People who are defending themselves on multiple fronts tend to make mistakes. We parted at the subway entrance, Marcus heading back to his office while I decided to take advantage of being in the city to run a few errands before returning to Westchester. I needed practical things for my Boston trip: a new suitcase, some casual clothes to replace the formal wardrobe that had been my uniform as Gregory's wife. As I browsed through a department store, selecting jeans and sweaters and comfortable shoes, my phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Ethics Committee just informed Gregory of Tuesday's board presentation. He's being called to respond on Wednesday. Thought you should know. I appreciated the heads up. Gregory would now be aware that his professional misconduct had been discovered, though he might not yet know about the potential criminal investigation or that I had provided evidence to both the Ethics Committee and the DA's office. Thank you, I texted back. Be careful. He's becoming desperate. Her response came quickly. Already changed my locks and told building security not to let him up. Taking no chances. Smart woman, I thought. I made a mental note to review my own security arrangements before leaving for Boston. By the time I finished shopping and caught the train back to Westchester, evening was falling. The grand house looked particularly empty as I approached, its windows dark except for the timed lights in the entryway that switched on automatically at dusk. As I entered the security code and pushed open the front door, I sensed immediately that something was wrong. A faint scent of Gregory's cologne lingered in the air. My pulse quickened as I stood motionless in the foyer, listening intently. Silence. I considered retreating, calling the police from outside, but something stopped. Me. This was still my home, at least legally. I refused to be driven from it by fear. "Gregory?" I called out, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I know you're here." After a long moment, a light switched on in the study. Gregory appeared in the doorway, looking nothing like the polished, confident surgeon I had married. His normally immaculate hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled and half untucked. But most striking was his expression, a volatile mixture of anger, desperation, and something that might have been grief. "How could you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "After 15 years, how could you do this to me?" I set down my shopping bags, but maintained my distance. "Do what, exactly? File for divorce after discovering your multiple affairs? Or provide evidence of your professional misconduct to protect patients at risk?" "Both," he spat. "All of it. You're destroying everything I've built. My reputation, my career." "You destroyed those things yourself, Gregory," I interrupted calmly. "I'm simply refusing to help you conceal the damage any longer." He took a step toward me, and I tensed, but he stopped himself, running a hand through, his hair in a gesture of agitation. "The ethics committee, that's Eleanor's vendetta. She's always been jealous of my success. But you went to the district attorney?" His voice rose in disbelief. "Criminal charges, Rebecca? Is that how much you hate me now?" "I didn't go to the DA," I corrected him. "They came to me. And I don't hate you, Gregory. I simply don't protect you anymore." He laughed bitterly. "Semantics. You gave them evidence. You're cooperating with their investigation. You gave them the offshore accounts." "Actually, Sophia provided those," I said mildly, watching his face pale at the revelation. "She was quite thorough in her documentation. Dates, amounts, communications with your financial advisor in Grand Cayman. All very damning." "Sophia," he whispered, seeming genuinely shocked. "But she also provided evidence to the ethics committee," I finished for him. "As did Natalie. You really should be more careful about which women you bring into your confidence, Gregory. We tend to compare notes eventually." He sank into a chair, suddenly looking old and defeated. This can't be happening. I felt a surprising flicker of pity for him. Not enough to reconsider my course of action, but enough to recognize the tragedy of his situation. A gifted surgeon who had allowed his ego and appetites to erode not just his marriage, but his professional ethics, his judgment, his very identity. "How did you get in?" I asked, moving toward the kitchen, putting the island between us more for psychological than physical safety. "I still have keys," he replied dully. "It's still my house." "Not for much longer," I countered. "And in the meantime, you're trespassing. You should leave before I call the police." He looked up at that, his expression hardening. "You wouldn't." I pulled out my phone. "Try me." For a tense moment, I thought he might refuse, might escalate the confrontation. But then his shoulders sagged, and he stood up wearily. "What do you want, Rebecca? There must be something. Name your price." "My price?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't a negotiation, Gregory. It's a divorce, an ethics investigation, and potentially a criminal case. You can't simply write a check and make it all go away. Everyone has a price," he insisted, a hint of his old arrogance resurfacing. "What's yours? The house? The Hamptons property? The investment portfolio? Name it, and it's yours. Just stop cooperating with these investigations." I studied him, truly seeing the man I had married for what might have been the first time, not the brilliant surgeon or charming partner, or even the serial philanderer, but someone fundamentally incapable of understanding that some things couldn't be bought, bartered, or manipulated. "I don't want anything from you, Gregory," I said finally. "Not anymore. What I want is to move forward with my life, to reclaim my name, my identity, my sense of purpose. And none of that requires your permission or cooperation. They'll destroy me, he said, his voice barely audible. Between Eleanor's ethics committee and the DA's investigation, I'll lose everything. My license, my practice, maybe even my freedom. Is that what you want? To see me ruined? What I want is irrelevant, I replied. This is about consequences, not vengeance. You chose to perform surgeries while impaired. You chose to falsify billing records. You chose to hide assets offshore. Each of those decisions had potential repercussions, which you ignored because you thought yourself untouchable. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices. He stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time, as well. Not as the compliant wife or social asset or convenient household manager, but as a person with her own moral compass, her own agency, her own capacity for decisiveness. I loved you once, he said finally. Did you know that? In the beginning, it wasn't all calculation and convenience. I genuinely loved you. I believe you, I said, and meant it. Just as I loved you. But that was a long time ago, Gregory. For both of us. He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and placed his house keys on the kitchen island. I'll have my lawyer contact Marcus about revising the settlement agreement. In light of everything. That would be wise, I agreed. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with a question that seemed to genuinely perplex him. Was it worth it? Bringing the lawyer to our anniversary dinner? Setting this all in motion? I considered his question seriously. I didn't set anything in motion, Gregory. I simply stopped pretending not to see what was already happening. And yes, that was absolutely worth it. He nodded once more, a gesture that might have been acceptance or merely resignation, then left without another word. I watched through the window as he got into his Porsche and drove away, the taillights fading into the darkness. Only then did I allow myself to tremble, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up with me. I poured a glass of wine, with unsteady hands, and carried it upstairs to the guest room that had become my sanctuary. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I reflected on Gregory's question. Was it worth it? The public confrontation, the legal complications, the potential financial impact of his professional downfall, was freedom worth that price? The answer came, with absolute clarity, yes. The woman who had walked into Le Bernardin 2 nights ago with a USB drive of evidence and a divorce lawyer on speed dial had taken the first step toward reclaiming herself. The woman who had testified to the district attorney's office today, who had booked a flight to Boston, who had updated her resume and considered new professional opportunities, she was worth every moment of discomfort, every confrontation, every complication that arose from her choices. I picked up my phone and texted my sister. Flight booked for Monday morning. Looking forward to a fresh start. Her reply came almost immediately. Guest room ready. Wine chilled. New beginnings waiting. I smiled, feeling a sense of peaceful certainty wash over me. Gregory was right about one thing. He would likely lose everything. He valued his practice, his reputation, possibly his freedom. But I had already found something far more valuable than anything I was leaving behind. I had found myself again. 1 year later, I sat on my sister's balcony overlooking the Charles River, nursing a glass of wine as the setting sun painted the water gold. My phone buzzed with a news alert, something I'd set up months ago and nearly forgotten. Former top surgeon Gregory Blackwell, sentenced to 4 years for insurance fraud and medical malpractice. I didn't need to read the article. I'd provided my testimony months ago, then deliberately stepped back from the proceedings. Gregory's downfall had never been my goal, merely a consequence of choices he'd made long before I brought a divorce lawyer to our anniversary dinner. Everything okay? My sister joined me, settling into the adjacent chair. Just closure, I replied, showing her the headline. She studied my face. Regrets? None, I said honestly. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. I'd received the Westchester house, which I promptly sold, half the investment portfolio, and a small percentage of Gregory's remaining assets after restitution to the defrauded insurance companies. Less than I might have gotten had his career remained intact, but more than enough to start over. The offshore accounts had been frozen by federal authorities, their contents eventually divided between tax penalties and patient compensation funds. The diamond ring intended for Sophia had been auctioned along with other assets to pay Gregory's legal fees. As for me, my consulting position at Northeastern had evolved into a full-time faculty role teaching healthcare finance. I'd joined the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation, where my financial expertise proved unexpectedly valuable. And last month, I'd closed on a small but sun-filled condo near the river, my first home purchased entirely in my own name. Eleanor, Sophia, and even Natalie had remained in my life, our unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of shared betrayal evolving into something genuine and supportive. We met for dinner whenever I returned to New York, comparing notes not on Gregory but on our own lives moving forward. "You know what tomorrow is, don't you?" my sister asked, refilling our glasses. I smiled. 1 year since the dinner. "The anniversary of your freedom," she corrected. "Worth celebrating, I think." I raised my glass in agreement, watching the last rays of sunlight shimmer on the water. The woman who had walked into Le Bernardin that night, wounded, angry, determined, had served her purpose. She had cleared the path for this new Rebecca to emerge, confident, purposeful, whole. He had brought his mistress to our anniversary dinner. I had brought a divorce lawyer for dessert, and in that single, decisive moment, I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my entire future. That, I reflected as darkness fell, and the city lights began to twinkle along the riverbank, was the sweetest dessert of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.